Find more great shows or join the team at sport-social.co.uk.
Hello, welcome back to the Masterclass, the Man United Tactical Podcast. We have another special show today, another player analysis show with the fantastic Joe Fischetti from the Forza Napoli podcast. He's joining me. He's been on the show quite a while ago. No, Joe, probably over a year ago. We were just chatting. I can't believe it's the last time that we've properly spoken. But today we are going to be talking about Victor Osimhen. He is the third striker in this series of player analysis shows. We've done one on Darwin Núñez already from Benfica, and we have also done one on a couple of other players as well. So make sure you do check that out and drop all your comments on who you want to see next. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button as well. Joe, welcome back. Long time no speak. How are things going? And how's Napoli's season been? Because I know there are a lot of listeners that don't watch a lot of Calcio this season, but it's been a great title race nonetheless, with Milan doing very well this season.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for having me back. It's always a pleasure to chat with you, Haider. In terms of Napoli's season, it's been a bit of an emotional roller coaster for the last few rounds. It started incredibly well with Napoli winning their first 10 matches of the season. That really carried Napoli throughout the Serie A campaign and allowed Napoli to remain in contention for the Scudetto. And it fell apart over the last few rounds, starting with a loss to Fiorentina, then a draw to Roma with a goal conceded in the 89th minute, and then a loss to Empoli, having been up 2-0 up to the 80th minute, and then conceding 3 goals in 7 minutes, and that was sort of the season in a nutshell there. So the season, other than Napoli hasn't won a Scudetto in a really long time, so fans got really, really excited, and rightfully so. But otherwise, I think it's been a fairly good season, especially considering that Napoli have missed the Champions League for the last 2.
If we just sort of dial back and look at his career, he started at Wolfsburg, went to Lille, had a great season at Lille, and that prompted Napoli to fork out a really big fee. I mean, you're looking at 70 million euros, possibly rising to 80 million, which is a club record, to bring him to Napoli. And looking at the season so far, 17 and 29, I believe, in all competitions. I think it's 13 or 14 in 24 games this season. He has been injured, I believe. So what is your sort of judgment on his time at Napoli? Has he been a success? And, do you think that injury was maybe key to derailing Napoli's title charge this season?
Well, first of all, I would say he's been a resounding success in his 2 seasons now at Napoli. Unfortunately, in both seasons, he's been set back by injuries. Last season, he picked up a shoulder injury playing for Nigeria in international play, and that kept him out for 10 matches. But when he came back, he scored for fun. And then this season, he picked up a face injury, fractured his cheekbone going to head a ball, and he collided with an Inter player. And so that set him back again. He missed 8 or 9 matches with that injury. He's been playing with a face mask since he returned. But again, the thing about Osimhen is when he does play, he's made a huge impact, whether it's scoring goals or creating space just because of the way he moves on the pitch, winning penalties, even though those 13 goals he scored this season have all been from open play because he doesn't take the penalty kicks for Napoli. So 13 goals in 24 matches, that's a career. It matches his career best. I think he scored 13 in a top 5 European league. I think he scored 13 with Lille as well. So his productivity has been fantastic. Interestingly, Napoli fared pretty well when he was out. Dries Mertens stepped in. But there were a couple key matches against some weaker clubs in Empoli and Spezia where Napoli dropped points. They were still the better club, though. So I don't know necessarily that there was a huge... I mean, in terms of results, you could probably say that there was a drop-off in performance without him in the squad, but I don't know necessarily that it was because Victor himself wasn't in the squad.
Very interesting. You bring up some key sort of strengths and weaknesses. What I do want to ask is that before we go into that, do you think his injury record is a bit of a concern? I mean, I know that you've mentioned a couple of injuries. Obviously, the broken nose isn't something that's going to be recurring, but he has had a few injuries. I did look at his injury record when he was at Lille, so he's had a few here and there. Is that something to be concerned about, or is it just these are two freak injuries and he should be fine and should be able to keep fit?
I would say they're two freak injuries. If it was a knee, an ankle, something like that, I'd be a lot more concerned just because of the likelihood of re-injuring one of those body parts. But a face injury, I mean, part of that, and you mentioned we'll come to his style of play, but part of that is because of how aggressive he is and how he likes to attack the ball. And I guess in some cases, maybe you can look at that as being a little bit risky. But at the same time, you want a player that's hungry like Victor is. So, it's certainly not something you want to fault him for. So I would say these are more likely freak types of injuries that I wouldn't really consider that a big concern with Victor.
Absolutely. Well, let's move on now, Joe, to strengths and weaknesses. You mentioned fantastic movement. I really like him. I think he's intelligent. I think he understands, when to move into the channel, when to make those runs off the last man. He's obviously got great pace. He's a very good finisher. You mentioned as well that no penalty goals, which is actually very good. A return of 13 and 24. That's almost one every 2 games. So let's talk about some of his strengths and where can he develop some of those weaknesses as well, because he is still a very young player. There is a lot of raw ability there. But obviously that he can go up a couple of notches with that potential.
Yeah, in terms of weaknesses, I would say, especially if he wants to play in the Premier League, I think he's got to build some muscle. He's if you look at his body type, he's sort of tall and lanky. He doesn't have a ton of muscle on him. He's strong when he has decent hold up play. He can hold up the ball, but at the same time, we've seen when he's been matched against some of the stronger center backs in the league, they have been able to shut him down, and it's largely either because they're defending him with multiple players, which, I mean, there's not much you can do about that. You just hope that means that there's someone open, that you take advantage of the numerical advantage elsewhere on the pitch. But it's also been because of just pure strength, where he's been muscled off of the ball, whether it was against Fiorentina, against Torino, where there's some big center backs, some strong center backs in the league that have been able to shut him down. Really, I think that's been his only weakness.
Yeah, I think what I find quite interesting about him, I've got the graphic here from FBref as a reference, just to go through some of his key statistics and how he is competing or where he stands against his counterparts across Europe and Europe's top 5 leagues. As you mentioned, look, he's in the 95th percentile for non-penalty goals. There's definitely, I'm going to ask you a question here, because there's some really good strikers actually who are having great seasons in Serie A. In the Premier League, I think there's a little bit of a lack of quality at the minute. There's a couple that stand out. But with the lack of quality, do you think there is a lack of quality with strikers around Europe in general? And that's why maybe Osimhen is standing out as a key target for a lot of big sides, because United are interested. Arsenal have also looked at him, and there are other sides that are looking for a number 9. A lot of them are aging at the minute as well.
Absolutely. I think in general, there are not that many quality number 9s available around Europe, and especially your sort of prototypical number 9, which I don't think Victor is, to be honest. I think you mentioned other players in the league. I think someone like Dusan Vlahovic is probably your prototypical number 9, big guy, can hold up the ball, quality finisher. It's so difficult to compare the strikers in Serie A at the moment because they're all so different. You have someone like Ciro Immobile, who's going to win Capocannoniere against top goal scorer in the league. I think it's now his 5th time in his career, which is insane. And
Jerry will be very happy, Joe.
yeah. And for all his shortcomings with the international team, he just keeps scoring and said, but he's a bit smaller. He's more accustomed to scoring on the break. Dusan Vlahovic, like I said, more of a typical striker. You have someone like Lautaro Martinez, who's usually someone who plays off of another striker, like we saw playing with Lukaku last season at Inter. And then Victor is unique because of his pace. And I guess you can say his size. He's very tall as well. So that's where Napoli have taken advantage of his strength. I think personally, Napoli have relied a little bit too much on the long ball, and it becomes a little bit predictable.
Or he's doing things which are creating chances for others. And I think that's really key when I look at Manchester United's front line. And while Ronaldo scored a lot of goals, the front line's been broken and fragmented. To be honest, he's probably the one that has actually delivered. But what we want to see more of is, a little bit more movement. And that's where I want to ask you as well, in terms of some of his strengths. You mentioned obviously that Napoli play a lot of the long ball. Is there a reliance on his pace? Can he play with back to goal? Can he link up with players around him? Because we're looking here, passes attempted, he's very low. He's in the second, sort of second percentile across Europe. He's at the bottom in terms of passes attempted. Completion, he's in the 51st percentile, and progressive passes, he's very low there as well. So he's not doing those things. You did mention that Napoli have relied on long balls. So that was my question. Do you think that is one of the reasons? Because you can't look at stats in isolation, can you? You've got to use the eye test. But they are a good foundation to back up, the idea that maybe Napoli have, under Spalletti, been going long. Or is it a case of, that Osimhen actually does struggle in this area? Because that's what I'm quite intrigued to ask.
Yeah, to be honest, those stats make sense to me, and I don't think it's necessarily a knock on Victor. I think it's a consequence of that tactic of the long ball. He's such a target man that more often than not, and like you said, in terms of the shot creating actions, because they're playing so much of the long ball, and because he's so fast, it's both a pro and a con is that he gets to the ball way before anybody else does. So what that means is there's often no teammates around him to pass the ball to, so he's going to try to create a shot.
So he's trying to, create a shot or try and go past his man and try and wait.
Exactly.
Okay, interesting.
Because we talked about his goals, but he has, I think, 5 assists as well on the season. So when he has teammates around him, we just saw this in the last round against Sassuolo. He played a gorgeous pass to Lozano on Napoli's third goal, I think it was. It was a bit of a drubbing that match, 6-1. But he is capable of playing a pass. I think just some of these stats may be a little bit misleading just because he's often playing so high up the park that there are not a lot of passes available to him.
That's very interesting, and thanks for clearing that up. And something I do want to bring up as well here before we talk about what he does off the ball is, progressive passes received and touches in the opposition box and progressive carries. So there's some really interesting ones that I like to see. It suggests to me that, one, obviously he's very good at carrying the ball. He can take the ball from A to B. He can take on a man, so that's positive, 75th percentile. But the bottom 2 touches in the attacking penalty area suggests to me that he understands. He's got smart movement in the penalty box. He will be a penalty box striker as well, which is important for Manchester United. And progressive passes received as well. He is looking to move. He is looking to create space. He is looking to pull either centre backs out wide into the channel, or he is looking to break and play on the last man. So those 3 statistics, do they reflect the sort of player he is? Is he someone that is very dangerous in the box? Is he someone that can take you from A to B and can scare defensive oppositions?
He is. It's a little bit difficult because, you mentioned his abilities to sort of link up play. I guess if you want to call it an area for improvement, it's that he doesn't have the greatest touch in the world. It's by no means a poor touch, but I think because of his size, he's not as great at linking up play, playing with his back.
He's not a Lukaku touch, is he?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm so accustomed to him attacking in transition that off the top of my head, I'm trying to think, how well does he play in the area? It's not really a big part of Napoli's attack. I think largely because, again, Napoli focus a lot on attacking in transition. There's a lot of build-up play, but it's, a lot of goals have come from set pieces, from corner kicks. That's one area that he's really improved in during this season is his ability to win balls in the air, whether it's in the area or just on long balls at midfield or whatnot. I think he has 5 goals from headers this season, and I believe all of them came after he came back from fracturing his cheekbone, which is, again, it tells you about his courage and the way that he plays. So in that sense, he's a threat in the area because of his size. He's not as much of a threat, I would say, in terms of sort of tight, intricate passes in the area.
Very interesting. Let's move on to how he'd fit into Ten Hag's system. So we'll talk here briefly because I think a lot of the information you've given has actually shed a lot of light on where he's strong. We spoke about Darwin Núñez the other week, from Benfica, and he's obviously a player that's had a really good season as well. But there were concerns about how he was in the link-up play. You shared that he has got a good touch. A lot of emphasis on the number 9 in Ten Hag's system. If you look at what Sebastian Haller's done this season, he's been a great link-up player. He's been very smart with his movement. He's, what he's done is he's been able to drop deep, but he's also able to play on that last man. So when you have a look at the way Osimhen plays, could he fit into a possession-based system, having played, in a side that likes to play in transition, that likes to play in the counter-attack? And to add to that as well, there is obviously Ten Hag's preference to press as a unit, press from the front. And you look here at Osimhen's statistics, pressures 56th percentile. So, he's definitely got the engine, the physique, the intelligence to press in the pressing side. So there's no concerns for you, if he was to go into Ten Hag's system and he was the man leading that press.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's one of the best attacking players as far as pressing goes in Serie A, in my opinion. And again, it's just because of that pace. Like, we've seen it time and time again, even though it's not necessarily reflected in these stats. We've seen it time and time again where it's almost as if defenders and goalkeepers don't anticipate how quick he is and how long his strides are. So he seems to get there before they think he would. And, whether he intercepts a pass or forces a long ball in a turnover or whatnot. So he's definitely great at pressing. I think he has the potential to come drop deeper and receive the ball if he needs to. Again, because his touch isn't the greatest, I don't know if that's something you would necessarily want to rely on too much, or at least it would need to be worked on. I think he's been used more as a focal point in Napoli's attack, so he hasn't been asked to do that as much. But, I should qualify what I've said in terms of Napoli focusing on the long ball. I think the long ball became a tactic a lot more in the second half of the season. In the first half of the season, Napoli was all about building up from the back and moving the ball around and possession-based football. So I think he would be very comfortable in a system like that. I think Napoli's change in tactics was largely because Napoli had, for the second season in a row, an injury crisis in the middle of the season where 5, 6, 7, 8 starters were missing. So they had to adapt, and perhaps that's why the use of the long ball became more of a priority. But I have no doubts that he can play in a possession-based system for sure.
Joe, let's move on to the final segment of the show. And obviously, everyone's biased to their own player in their team. Obviously, Jerry will tell everyone that Immobile is the best. If anyone's asking who Jerry is, that's Jerry Mancini, a good friend of Joe and myself. He'll always say that Immobile is the best number 9 to have ever graced the planet. And, obviously, a lot of Inter fans might say it's Lautaro. I do actually agree with your point on Lautaro, and he's someone that United have been linked with today, actually, to swap with Anthony Martial. I definitely think he's someone who's better as a second striker. I don't think he's going to go and get you 20 goals a season in the league. I think that's shown, but I do think he's a very good player who actually probably would excel in the hold-up and link-up play and a possession-based team. But where would you rank Osimhen? Because there's some really good strikers. You mentioned Vlahovic earlier, who's had a great season. Obviously, he's moved to Juve and got his big move, and he's still scoring goals there. Tammy Abraham has been sensational for Roma. Really, really developed under Mourinho very, very well. Osimhen's another fantastic striker. Lautaro is a good striker as well. Leao is having a good season at Milan as well. So, there's some really good strikers. I'm missing. Is it Scamacca as well, who looks like a real player? There's so many good strikers actually in Serie A. So where does Osimhen rank? I actually think he's different to all of them. I think he's got a little bit of something about him. He almost, for me, when I watch him play, to be honest, Joe, I almost look at him as he's got, some of the trickery and, explosiveness of a wide man, but he can finish really well. And he's got the height and he's got the intelligence with his movements. So, yeah, where would you rank him in that list? Because there's some really good strikers. If I missed anyone out, please do add them as well.
Yeah, no, I think you've pretty much covered all of the main guys. Like I said, because all the strikers are so different in the league, it makes it very difficult to rank them. If I had to pick one, for me, I'd still say Immobile, just because of how consistently he's been doing it for so long. Again, Osimhen, it's only his second season in Serie A. Tammy Abraham only his first. Lautaro is a very streaky forward, so he'll have stretches where he'll score lots of goals and then stretches where he won't score many. Scamacca, again, he's just starting to come into his prime, so it might be a little bit early, and it's different, obviously, when you're playing for Sassuolo compared to one of the top clubs. He's a potential player that could play for Inter, or he's even been linked to Napoli if Osimhen leaves. But I would say Scamacca is a bit lower. Vlahovic is an interesting one because I think he's become a bit of a victim of the system, and he was a benefactor of the system because Fiorentina were such an attack-minded team under Vincenzo Italiano that he was scoring goals like crazy. Since he joined Juventus, he still scored a little bit, but obviously Max Allegri is a pragmatist, so Juve score one goal and they sit back and defend it.
Joe, he gives me Piontek vibes at Genoa.
Yeah, it might. Like
he's a better player, but
scenery impacts their goal scoring production. But for me, I'd say, and you're right, I am biased, but I'd say Victor's probably a top 3 striker in Serie A at the moment.
I think I'd agree with that as well. And he's definitely someone that when I look at the strikers in Serie A, I think if they are going to transition to Premier League where it is a faster league, it is more end-to-end. I think Serie A is more tactical, more strategic. You don't find that, I think it's been great this season, actually. It's been very enjoyable. A great distraction from Manchester United this season, who've been absolutely shocking. But I would agree. I think if there's one player that could transition to across multiple leagues, so some players just do suit a league better. I think it would be him. Like Immobile is one of those players. I think he struggled at Dortmund, didn't he? But he's just been unbelievable at Lazio. And I look at Osimhen, I think he's someone that could transition. But final question, Joe, before we wrap up, thank you as always for joining me and for providing such a great insight. Do you expect Osimhen to leave and do Napoli need to sell?
I would say the answer to both of those questions is no, at least not this season. I think your guess is as good as mine at the end of next season. But just when I look at the clubs that Osimhen's been linked to, all in the Premier League, because our president, Aurelio De Laurentiis, has slapped €100 million price tag on him. So the only clubs that can afford him are probably Premier League clubs and maybe, the PSGs of the world. But the key thing for me is that there's two things. One of those clubs is Arsenal, but Victor already declined Arsenal when he joined Napoli. So whatever the reason, maybe it was because at that time they weren't as competitive. Obviously, Arsenal are currently sitting in a Champions League position, whereas Napoli have already guaranteed themselves Champions League play next season. And then between United and Newcastle, again, neither likely to be, well, we know Newcastle won't be there. United, as you know, probably a long shot at this point. So I think he's going to stay at least one more season, play in the Champions League. He has a colleague, I guess it's a member of his staff or his entourage, I guess you can say, Omar Katugba, who's been probably the most reliable source on any news associated with Victor Osimhen. And what he said recently was that Victor wants to write a part of the history of Napoli like Edinson Cavani did and Gonzalo Higuain did before him, which suggests that he's going to stay in the short term. But he also said, at some point he would not turn down the opportunity to have an experience in the Premier League. So what that tells me is Napoli probably have one, maybe two more seasons left with Victor, and then he'll look to make a move to the Premier League.
Yeah, I expect that as well. And it's probably going to be the best thing for his development. But out of all the strikers been linked to Manchester United, and there's been a lot. There always is every season. He's one that actually excites me the most. I really liked him at Lille. I thought, and when I saw him sign with Napoli, I was really shocked at the amount of money that Napoli did spend because it was a big amount. But when you look at him and Jonathan David, obviously he's replaced him, and you can think you can see similarities in the types of player they are. But I did think that they struggled initially when he did go. I'm a big fan of his. But look, Joe, thank you so much for joining me as always. We're coming up to time. Where can the listeners find all your fantastic work and your podcast as well? We'll make sure we'll put it in the link below.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me, first of all. And you can find the podcast on all your usual podcast platforms. It's at Forza Napoli Pod or Forza Napoli Cultural Podcast. You can find me on Twitter, mostly at Joe_Fischetti5. And again, the podcast on all your social media channels at Forza Napoli Pod.
Make sure you check it out, guys. Serie A has been fantastic this season. It's been the most entertaining league out of anyone, and especially as a Man United fan. If you want something different, there's some really great Serie A podcasts. Joe is one of them, and there's a lot of others as well. Guys, as always, give us a follow on at TF Masterclass. Give myself a follow on at Haider Rubbani, and give Joe a follow on at Joe_Fischetti5. Have a fantastic day, and we will see you all next time.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.